Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is, well, it's laser-focused and really critically important. We're dissecting the 2025 Salesforce Salesloft breach. This has pretty much become the case study for how modern supply chain compromises actually unfold. And this isn't just, a story about stolen customer data. It's a terrifying look at the rise of the non-human identity.
Right.
The machine account, the integration key, basically as the most potent weapon an attacker can wield today.
Yeah, absolutely. It shifts the whole landscape.
Think about the shockwaves this sent through the security community. I mean, really.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about OAuth tokens, these digital keys. And they were stolen not from Salesforce's core platform itself, but from a trusted third-party AI chat agent integration Salesloft drift.
That integration point is key.
And then these tokens were used to systematically just plunder data from over 700 customer environments.
700. It's staggering.
Including some of the biggest names in cybersecurity itself, like Cloudflare and Zscaler. I mean, the irony there.
Right. Security companies caught in the net.
And the attackers weren't logging in with passwords or anything like that. They were basically acting as legitimate, trusted applications.
Yeah, and that's the scary part. This incident, it's really a harsh reckoning for the entire industry, I think. For years, security architects, they've focused immense resources on protecting human users. MFA, geo-unusual login detection, phishing defense, the whole long yards.
All the standards.
Exactly. But the core access vector here, it just bypassed all of that scrutiny completely. A stolen OAuth token is, well, by definition, it's a pre-authenticated session.
Already trusted.
Already trusted. It exposed this massive blind spot, the security posture of these trusted third-party SaaS apps that we all rely on for daily business ops. Yeah. When that trust gets weaponized so efficiently, your traditional human-centric security perimeter, it just collapses instantly.
Yeah, it really sets the tone for where we need to focus our defenses going forward, doesn't it?
It has to.
But okay, before we dive really deep into the technical anatomy of this attack, we do have a quick but important message for you, our dedicated listeners, about the broader security landscape. Welcome to InfoSec Bytes, your go-to podcast for bite-sized insights on information security, AI, cloud, quantum, and cybersecurity incident root cause analysis. With over 100 episodes, we've got you covered on the latest trends and tips. Please like, subscribe, and share to join the conversation on various platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Amazon Music, and stay secure.
Okay, so let's unpack this step by step. Starting with how the attackers UNC 6395 actually got their initial access. If you were to draw a picture, like a perfect model of a purely non-human identity attack, an NHI attack, this would be it.
The textbook case.
Pretty much. The operational actor, the one tracked by Google Amandian as UNC 6395, they spent months setting up this chain. It wasn't quick.
Right, and while the huge data theft felt sudden to the victims, you mentioned the bulk of the actual high-volume querying and the exfil. That was compressed into a really tight window, wasn't it?
Yeah, very tight. Primarily between August 8th and August 18th, 2025. Just 10 days, essentially.
Wow.
Which shows, remarkable operational efficiency. They moved incredibly fast once they got their hands on those valuable tokens.
But the groundwork was laid much earlier.
Absolutely. The access chain started way before that. And this really illustrates the power of a modern supply chain attack. We're tracking the initial foothold back to Salesloft's own development environment. Specifically, their GitHub code repository and the associated CI/CD pipelines.
CI/CD.
And this happened sometime between March and June 2025, so months earlier.
Right. That's a classic opening move for sophisticated groups, isn't it?
Yeah.
Compromising the CI/CD pipeline. Can you elaborate a bit on the mechanism there? Like, how does hitting a developer repo end up giving access to actual customer keys?
Yeah, it's often done through, well, one of two main ways, or sometimes a mix. First, the attackers might introduce, say, a malicious guest user into the repository itself, or maybe into an adjacent system that happens to have access to production secrets.
Sneaking someone in.
Exactly. Or second, and this is often more insidious, they abuse rogue CI/CD workflows, or even ones that are already established and trusted. See, these pipelines are designed to automatically pull credentials needed for deployment or testing, right?
Automation.
So if the attacker can compromise the pipeline itself, they can basically force it to dump environmental variables or secret tokens that are configured for deployment or for service-to-service communication.
Gotcha. So the GitHub foothold was really the upstream pivot point. They leveraged the trusted status of that dev environment to get to the real prize.
Exactly right. They use that access to pivot directly into the Drisht AWS cloud environment.
Yeah.
And their target inside AWS was precisely where customer credentials are often automatically stored for the service to function. Secret management services.
Wow.
We're talking about AWS Secrets Manager, or maybe the Systems Manager Parameter Store, SSM, as it's often called.
Right.
The goal wasn't just, stealing data from Salesloft. The primary goal was to steal the customer OAuth tokens residing in those secret vaults.
That pattern GitHub compromise, leading to a cloud secret store pivot that feels like it's becoming the signature move for these higher-tier actors, doesn't it?
It really does. It highlights that developers' systems, their environments, are now arguably the most critical path to getting persistent, often unmonitored access.
And once they had those OAuth tokens...
Then they held what we're truly calling the new crown jewels.
Yeah. Okay, let's spend a moment really defining these keys. For our listeners who might be familiar with passwords, maybe MFA, what exactly is an OAuth token in this context, and why is stealing one so catastrophic?
Okay, good question. Fundamentally, an OAuth token is like a persistent, pre-authenticated digital key. It grants permission to an application, like Drift in this case, to perform actions without needing repeated logins.
Like a valet key for an application.
That's a good analogy, yeah. In the Salesforce context, when Salesloft Drift integrates, it does an initial verification, and then it gets back two types of tokens usually, an access token and often a refresh token. The access token is the immediate permission slip, lets it do things right now. The refresh token, though, that allows the application to generate new access tokens even after the first one expires.
So it keeps the access going.
Keeps it going, exactly. Without the user needing to log in again or re-authenticate manually, it provides persistence.
So, okay, if I steal a valid token, I'm not really breaching the system in the traditional sense. I'm actually using the system exactly as it was intended to be used.
That's precisely it. You're operating within the trusted framework.
And because the token is the authentication, it completely bypasses any multi-factor authentication the customer might have painstakingly set up for their human users, right?
Completely bypasses it. MFA is totally irrelevant when the attacker holds a valid, often long-lived session key, like an OAuth token. To the defensive systems, the security logs, the activity just looks like, oh, Drift is running a query, business as usual. The trust model is perfectly intact from a protocol perspective, even though the entity controlling the access is malicious, which makes detection based on suspicious login attempts completely ineffective here.
Right, because it's not a login attempt, it's an authenticated action.
Exact.
And initially the focus was all on Salesforce, but you mentioned the scope of the key harvesting was actually much broader than just Salesforce tokens.
Oh, much broader, yeah. While the attack vector, the way in, was the Salesloft Drift integration connecting to Salesforce, the attackers used that same access path, that compromised position, to extract other connected tokens that Salesloft might have been storing or had access to.
Oh.
So the breach expanded significantly. It ended up affecting OAuth tokens used for Google Workspace integrations, potentially for services like Slack or Microsoft 365, maybe dozens of other connected applications.
Wow, so the blast radius just kept expanding.
Exactly, and that's why this incident really demonstrates the terrifying blast radius of a single integration failure. One vulnerability becomes a key to this vast interconnected ecosystem of cloud services.
Yeah.
You don't just lose data in one tenant, you potentially compromise every single application connected through that initial weak link.
Okay, moving into the second part then. Let's look at the actual operational strategy of this group, UNC 6395. Because they seem to demonstrate an exceptional level of discipline, didn't they? Prioritizing long-term value over just a quick smash and grab.
Absolutely. That's a key observation. The primary goal here, it really wasn't just to steal a list of names and emails and sell it quickly on the dark web.
Which we often see.
Yeah. The motivation here seemed to be massive credential harvesting, specifically for secondary intrusion operations down the line. They were likely staging for future espionage, maybe financial monetization through other means, or even potential future sabotage, basically using those 700-plus victim environments as a massive reconnaissance platform.
A treasure trove of potential future access.
That's exactly.
Now, we did see a lot of noise online around this time, though. Groups like Shiny Hunters were claiming affiliation via Telegram channels and such. How do analysts typically reconcile those public claims with the more technical attribution, like the one to UNC 6395?
Yeah, that's important for listeners to understand. It's actually pretty common in these high-profile attacks. Groups like Shiny Hunters, they often engage in, let's call it, opportunistic credit claiming. Or sometimes they might actually buy some early access data from the real operational actor to seem legitimate.
Hmm.
However, the deep technical analysis, like the work done by Mandiant, classified the activity under UNC 6395 because the specific tradecraft, the tools used, the exact timing, the evasion techniques, it just didn't match the known tactics, techniques, and procedures, the TTPs, of those claiming groups.
So you follow the technical evidence, not the noise.
You have to follow the technical signatures, yeah. Which in this case painted a picture of a sophisticated actor, maybe nation state, or a highly organized criminal group, really prioritizing strategic credential theft over quick publicity.
Okay, let's talk about that tradecraft then, because this is where the sophistication really comes through, I think. If they had persistent access to Salesforce via those Solon OAuth tokens, why didn't they just search inside Salesforce for the credentials they wanted? Like, searching for strings starting with IKEA for AWS keys or things like that.
Yes, that's probably the most critical strategic decision they made, and it's a brilliant evasion technique. Running high-volume searches for known credential patterns like IKEA, or begin RSA private key, or specific Snowflake token prefixes within Salesforce's standard interface, or using the standard search API, that's noisy.
Right, it would stand out.
It stands out. It triggers alerts specifically designed to catch unusual internal search activity. UNC 6395 clearly understood that internal search patterns are heavily monitored in mature environments.
So what do they do instead to get those credentials?
Instead, they systematically exported all the accessible data from the victim organizations. Just bulk download everything.
Everything, wow.
Everything they could reach with those token permissions. And they exfiltrated that massive data payload to their own externally managed infrastructure. That's where they ran their credential harvesting operation.
Offsite.
Completely offsite. Once the data was safely outside the victim's environment, they were free to run common, powerful open source tools like TruffleHog.
Right. TruffleHog is designed specifically for finding secrets in large data sets.
Exactly. It scans through everything looking for those patterns. So they effectively ran a massive silent internal audit of 700 companies' data, but on their own servers, where there are absolutely zero monitoring constraints from the victim's side.
It's incredibly smart and incredibly patient.
Patient and effective.
Okay.
The goal was to scrape out those really valuable, long-lived credentials, AWS access keys, Snowflake tokens, maybe VPN credentials that were unfortunately buried within standard Salesforce data fields. This external scraping approach allowed them to operate almost silently within the victim environments for days on end.
And the source material also highlights they had a very specific, almost surgical focus on one particular type of data that yielded, well, exponential results for them.
Yes, the focus on support case text. That was arguably the golden nugget of this entire operation. Attackers know, seasoned attackers know, that when customers or even internal staff need technical help, they often upload or just paste sensitive information directly into support tickets for troubleshooting purposes.
Yeah, you just want to get the problem solved quickly.
Exactly. Convenience trumps security sometimes, so you see things like API keys, development credentials, unencrypted database connection strings, sometimes even plain text passwords that absolutely should not be stored anywhere near a CRM system.
And we have hard evidence of just how effective targeting this specific data was, don't we? Particularly the details that came out from Cloudflare.
We do. Cloudflare confirmed the severity of this exact issue. They reported that 104 of their own sensitive API tokens were exposed solely because they were found embedded in compromised Salesforce support cases that were exfiltrated.
Just sitting there in the text.
Sitting there. This forced Cloudflare into executing an immediate global rotation of every single affected key. It perfectly demonstrates how poor data hygiene in one system like CRM support tickets can directly provide the keys to fundamentally different critical infrastructure, like cloud APIs.
It really underscores the interconnectedness of risk.
Absolutely.
Now, to manage this scale, we're talking 700 plus organizations, potentially terabytes of data exfiltrated.
Yeah.
That this clearly wasn't some manual process using a web browser.
Oh, not at all. Absolutely not. We saw clear forensic evidence of sophisticated automation being used. UNC 6395 relied heavily on custom Python scripts. They were leveraging common but powerful libraries like IOTTP and requests.
Standard tools for web interaction.
Standard, but used effectively. These scripts were clearly designed specifically to automate bulk API queries. Salesforce uses its own query language, Salesforce Object Query Language, or SOQL, for this kind of thing.
SOQL, right.
They even used custom user agents that showed up in the logs, things like Salesforce Multi-Org Fetcher 1.0. That name itself signals this was likely a dedicated multi-tenant tool built specifically for this mass exfiltration mission.
And let's just clarify for listeners what using SOQL allows them to do that. Say, standard searching through the UI doesn't.
Right. SOQL is immensely powerful because it allows programmatic, high-volume data extraction that looks very much like legitimate back-end service activity. Instead of someone clicking through a graphical interface page by page, the script can query the organization's entire data schema. It can map out tables, request specific fields across millions of records, and pull massive result sets down using Salesforce's Bulk API jobs.
So it allows for near-total data extraction in just a fraction of the time a human would ever require.
Exactly. Highly efficient, highly automated.
And as a final layer of operational security, they also tried to route their traffic cleverly and cover their tracks within Salesforce itself.
They did. Their defense evasion included actively deleting the Salesforce asynchronous job logs. These are logs often used by defenders specifically to track large, bulk data operations.
Trying to hide the evidence of the mass download.
Precisely. Now, while the underlying, more fundamental event logs persisted, they couldn't delete those. This tactic was clearly designed to hinder immediate detection by security teams looking at the most obvious indicators of bulk export. Furthermore, all their malicious traffic was carefully routed through Tor exit nodes and numerous commercial cloud VPS services, especially DigitalOcean and AWS instances they controlled, making source attribution and simple IP blocking incredibly difficult for defenders.
Okay, so the technical execution by UNC 6395 was, well, masterful in its own way.
Yeah.
But it relied entirely on what seemed like systemic failures within the Salesloft and customer security stack, didn't it? If we look at the root causes, the breach happened entirely through mechanisms that were trusted, but maybe misgoverned or poorly configured.
That's exactly right. That's the crux of the shared responsibility gap that this whole incident just ripped wide open. While Salesforce, insists their core platform itself was secure, and the evidence seems to support that the failure occurred because the third-party integrations, like Drift, lacked proper governance and oversight.
Right.
The first, and maybe the most familiar root cause, is something we've already touched on: secrets and CI/CD.
Yeah, it's almost disheartening to see this pop up again. Why do organizations, especially security-focused vendors themselves, keep repeating this mistake of exposing critical secrets in their development environments? Feels like lesson number one.
It does, but it often comes down to, well, convenience again, and sometimes inadequate separation between development, testing, and production environments. Developers need access to credentials for testing integrations, for deployments, and without really rigorous secret management practices, things like using short-lived, just-in-time access credentials and robust secret scanning tools in the code repositories, these long-lived, powerful tokens just get embedded. They end up in configuration files or environmental variables, or checked into code repositories that are inevitably less protected than the hardened production systems.
So if the initial attack vector wasn't stopped right there, at the GitHub level, the whole downstream chain was basically doomed from the start.
Pretty much, yeah. That was the linchpin.
Okay, the second massive vulnerability, the one that really maximized the blast radius once the tokens were stolen, was the issue of overly broad OAuth scopes.
Ah, yes. This is just a catastrophic failure of the principle of least privilege. It's fundamental security, but it was missed here at scale. Many third-party SaaS integrations, and it appears the Salesloft Drift instance was among them, requested or were simply granted overly permissive scopes.
Meaning they could do too much.
Way too much. In a Salesforce context, this might mean granting the full scope, which basically allows the application to modify and view virtually all organizational data.
Wow.
Instead of using much more constrained scopes, like just API access, or even better, a specific read-only scope for only the objects absolutely necessary for the app's function, like maybe contact read.
Yeah, I mean, If the AI chat agent only really needs to read basic contact data to personalize a greeting, why on earth should it have the full scope that allows it to download highly confidential support cases or financial data?
Exactly. That full scope meant that when the token was stolen, the attacker immediately gained maximum possible access to the crown jewels. Everything from basic contacts right through to those sensitive support cases containing, for example, those 104 Cloudflare API keys.
And limiting those scopes is essentially a defensive measure that costs nothing but time and discipline to implement correctly during setup. Right.
That's the frustrating part. It costs almost nothing financially, just requires diligence during the integration setup and periodic reviews.
Okay, and compounding that issue was the use of long-lived tokens.
Yes. The access tokens, and critically, the refresh tokens that were stolen, were clearly not designed to expire quickly. They provided continuous, persistent access. This gave the attackers that crucial window, roughly 10 to 12 days, to conduct their mass exfiltration campaign before the industry-wide revocation finally occurred on August 20th.
So if those tokens had been constrained to expire much faster, say within an hour or two.
The window for massive theft would have been dramatically reduced. They might have gotten some data, but likely not the sheer volume across 700 organizations. Shorter lifetimes are a key mitigation.
Right. Okay. So beyond those configuration failures, what were the major gaps in the actual defensive posture that allowed, 700 organizations to be plundered for days without immediate detection, ringing alarm bells everywhere?
The primary failure, I think, across the entire victim pool was the insufficient monitoring of sauce-to-sauce activity. It's a huge blind spot. Organizations generally monitor human users logging in fairly well these days. We look for impossible travel, weird hours, etc. But they often lack the sophisticated tools or maybe the focus to monitor what a trusted machine identity, like an OAuth token, is actually doing inside their cloud tenants.
Because it looks legitimate.
Because it is technically legitimate.
Right.
A valid token running high-volume SOQL queries looks benign to many traditional security tools that primarily just check if the connection is properly authenticated. They aren't always looking at the behavior of that authenticated session.
And this brings us to something you mentioned earlier, what you called the logging cost reality, which sounds like a really troubling economic constraint.
It is. It's a massive systemic issue that this breach just put under a harsh spotlight. While Salesforce, for example, does offer comprehensive event monitoring logs that track things like bulk API usage, API anomalies, IP source changes, exactly the kinds of signals needed to detect this attack.
The good stuff.
The really good stuff, yeah. But these detailed logs are often part of their most premium, high-cost licensing tiers.
The upsell.
Exactly. So organizations, especially smaller ones, but even large enterprises, are frequently forced into this really difficult calculus. Do we pay substantial, sometimes exorbitant fees just for the necessary visibility? Or do we accept the risk of this kind of blind spot because of budget constraints?
Yeah.
This incident proves, I think definitively, that the potential cost of flying blind, the cost of a breach affecting 700 organizations, the reputational damage, the cleanup, it far, far exceeds the investment needed for adequate visibility.
It's a false economy.
It's a dangerous false economy, an economic constraint that attackers are clearly aware of and successfully exploiting.
Okay. And the final preventable failure seems to relate back to that high-value target you highlighted earlier. The inadequate support data hygiene.
Absolutely. The mere fact that sensitive, long-lived credentials like cloud API keys and internal VPN passwords were just left sitting in unencrypted support ticket text fields or maybe account notes. It shows a profound breakdown in organizational data handling policies and enforcement.
It's basic hygiene, really.
It's basic hygiene. Organizations absolutely must enforce strict technical controls, things like automated redaction tools that scan tickets for key patterns, strong encryption for any necessary case attachments, and combine that with rigorous, repeated training to prevent staff from storing secrets in non-secure environments like a CRM.
Yeah.
The attackers didn't have to brute force anything to get those keys. They were simply sitting there in the exported data ready to be harvested.
Okay, so given that the attackers were using valid, trusted tokens, detection had to pivot entirely away from just looking for known bad signatures or failed logins. How did the organizations that did eventually detect the compromise manage to identify the malicious activity? What actually worked?
Right. Effective detection, where it occurred before the global takedown, relied entirely on monitoring behavioral baselines. You simply can't look for atomic indicators like a bad IP or a bad password when the token itself is valid. You have to look for deviations in how that valid token is being used compared to its normal pattern.
Okay, can you walk us through maybe the prime example of a baseline deviation in this case, the kind of thing that should have triggered an alert?
The best example and the clearest one reported is the change in geographic and network context. We know, or defenders should have known, that the legitimate Salesloft drift integration, the non-human identity in question, consistently ran on AWS infrastructure. That was its normal operating environment.
Mm-hmm.
Expected behavior. Expected behavior. This means its OAuth connection attempts should have consistently originated from known expected AWS IP address ranges. So, when the same authorized identity, using the same valid token, suddenly started connecting from, say, DigitalOcean infrastructure or anonymous Tor exit nodes, both classic hosting spots for attack infrastructure, that change should have immediately triggered a critical alert.
Ah, okay. So the token was correct, the identity looked right, but the source environment, the place it was coming from, was fundamentally wrong. That shift from a major stable cloud provider like AWS to a commodity VPS provider like DigitalOcean, or worse, Tor, that's the
Yeah.
key tell.
That is the absolute key tell. And detecting it requires implementing specific detection rules focused on that behavior. Things like monitoring for unusual bulk API usage volumes, especially if it's coming from identities that aren't typical backend service accounts, or monitoring for large suspicious export jobs that deviate from the norm.
Right.
Furthermore, organizations that maybe managed to detect the initial cloud pivot, the compromise within Salesloft's AWS, they might have looked for signs of mass secret retrieval from their own cloud secret stores, like Secrets Manager or SSM, even if those retrievals were technically authorized by the compromised Salesloft internal role, looking for unusual volume there too.
Okay, so once the malicious activity was confirmed, the immediate containment phase was obviously vital. What happened there?
It was pretty decisive, thankfully. Salesloft and Salesforce acted relatively quickly once the scale was understood. They globally disabled all the Salesloft drift integrations on August 20th, 2025. And crucially, at the same time, they executed a forced revocation of all active access and refresh tokens associated with that integration across the board for all customers.
Cutting off the access completely.
Completely cutting off the access. That immediate, coordinated action was the only thing that definitively halted the attack flow across all 700-plus victims.
And for those hundreds of victim companies, what was the immediate, and I imagine quite painful, prescription for remediation? What did they have to do right away?
Yeah, the remediation steps for victims involved a massive, urgent effort. Companies like Cloudflare and Zscaler, and presumably many others, immediately initiated wide-scale revocation and rotation of every single API key, cloud credential, internal password, anything that might have been exposed or compromised, with a specific focus on anything found within those exported support cases.
Cleaning house, essentially.
A massive house cleaning, yeah. They also moved quickly to tighten up their OAuth governance practices immediately, finally enforcing minimum necessary scopes on integrations, applying strict IP address restrictions so apps could only connect from known static source addresses where possible, and dramatically shortening the allowed session timeouts for tokens going forward.
Applying the lessons learned quickly.
Applying them very quickly under pressure.
But the long-term architectural review, that's probably the real ongoing cost here, isn't it?
It really is. This incident basically mandates a complete reassessment of OAuth integration architectures for many organizations. Companies now have to look seriously at things like better segmenting customer tokens, maybe implementing solutions that provide more just-in-time access for sensitive operations rather than persistent tokens, and generally moving toward a model where every connected app, even one from a trusted vendor, is treated with more zero-trust principles,
Right.
often requiring things like IP-based access restrictions as just a baseline control, not an optional extra.
Okay, and finally, the legal and regulatory fallout from a breach of this magnitude is usually immense. What have we seen there?
We're already seeing major waves. Salesforce is currently facing a significant wave of litigation. This includes attempts to secure class action status in Northern California courts. The allegations generally center on fundamental failures in vendor oversight and implementing adequate security protocols to protect customer PII and operational integrity. While Salesforce continues to defend its core platform security, the legal battle will likely focus intensely on who ultimately bears responsibility for the failure of a trusted, integrated third-party mechanism. It's a complex question.
And for the publicly traded victims like Cloudflare and Zscaler, The SEC disclosure rule adds another immediate layer of complexity and pressure. Right.
Precisely. Any publicly traded companies that were victims had to very rapidly assess whether this compromise represented a material impact on their business, their operations, or their finances.
Which could trigger immediate public disclosure requirements.
Exactly. And beyond the lawsuits, the regulatory scrutiny is expected to be fierce. This incident is likely to spur new regulatory interests, maybe even new regulations, specifically targeting SaaS supply chain governance,
Okay.
focusing on demanding greater oversight into vendor security practices and potentially mandating better data protection controls, especially concerning cross-tenant data exposure like we saw here. This incident really serves as a significant regulatory bellwether for the SaaS world.
All right, let's try to synthesize this massive amount of information into really actionable knowledge for you, our listener. If we distill the entire anatomy of this Salesforce Salesloft breach down, what are, say, the 5 core unavoidable lessons we absolutely must learn about modern cybersecurity from this?
Okay. Yeah, the lessons are pretty foundational, I think, and they really define the next decade, or at least the near future, of cyber defense strategy. First, non-human identities, NHIs, are the new frontier, period. They provide persistence, they often have broad permissions, and they effortlessly bypass all those human-focused controls like MFA we rely on. You absolutely have to treat OAuth tokens, API keys, service account credentials, all machine identities, with the same, if not actually greater, security rigor that you apply to your top-tier human admin passwords. Manage them like critical infrastructure components that need automated rotation and really tight constraint.
Makes sense. Okay, number 2.
Second, supply chain attacks cascade, and they multiply the impact. Compromising one single deeply integrated vendor, like Salesloft here, is no longer just a localized problem for that vendor. The failure of Drift immediately gave the attackers this huge multiplier effect across 700 diverse customers. It created an exponential blast radius that conventional siloed defense models are just not prepared to contain effectively.
Right. Your security posture is only as strong as your weakest trusted vendor.
That's exactly it.
Okay, third lesson.
Third, detection absolutely requires behavioral baselines, not just signatures. We have to move beyond looking primarily for known malware hashes or suspicious passwords. Effective defense now depends entirely on having sophisticated monitoring that truly understands what normal activity looks like for every single third-party application connected to your environment. And critically, alerting when that valid trusted token suddenly starts connecting from a completely different geography or an unexpected cloud provider, like we saw with the DigitalOcean.
Gotcha. Behavioral anomalies are key. Number 4.
Fourth, logging visibility remains a fundamental challenge, and it's often, unfortunately, cost prohibitive. This is huge. The economic reality that paying substantial premiums is often required to get the detailed event logs necessary to detect these stealthy, high-volume programmatic attacks forces many organizations into accepting dangerous blind spots.
Yeah.
This breach starkly demonstrates that investing in full visibility isn't a luxury. It's a necessary cost of doing business securely in today's cloud-integrated world. The cost of not having it is potentially far greater.
Right. And the 5th lesson.
And finally, number 5. Credential sprawl amplifies risk exponentially. The attacker's operational discipline, their whole strategy, focused entirely on hunting for those embedded secrets. The keys and credentials inadvertently stored in easily exported non-security repositories like CRM support tickets. If you store high-value credentials in an unencrypted, easily accessible data silo, the compromise of that silo becomes almost inevitable over time. And when it happens, it provides the keys for secondary intrusions into your really mission-critical systems like AWS, Snowflake, internal infrastructure, you name it.
Okay, those 5 lessons are incredibly clear. Now, let's translate them into practical, immediate action items. For the listener who needs to go back to their team tomorrow, maybe Monday morning, and start hardening defenses based on what we've learned today, what are maybe the 4 most actionable next steps they should take?
Okay, 4 key actions. 1, treat OAuth tokens as critical, but make them short-lived credentials. Wherever technically possible, enforce policies that require token lifetimes measured in hours, maybe days at most, not weeks or months. Couple this with automated frequent rotation. This makes it much harder for a stolen key to maintain useful persistence.
Okay, short lifetimes. Number 2.
2, enforce least privilege on all third-party apps and do it rigorously. Go back and actively review every single third-party integration you have, especially any that currently hold broad permissions like the full scope. Restrict their API scopes only to the data and actions that are absolutely necessary for the application to perform its intended function, nothing more. And importantly, apply IP-based access restrictions wherever feasible so that the integration can only connect from known expected IP ranges associated with that vendor.
Makes sense. Third action.
3. Implement zero tolerance for storing secrets in unencrypted data repositories. This is non-negotiable. You must deploy tools for automated secret scanning and maybe even redaction across all your non-security-focused platforms, things like CRMs, ticketing systems, wikis, shared documents, and combine that tech with strict, mandatory, recurring training for all support personnel and developers to eliminate the human element of credential sprawl. Make it culturally unacceptable.
Culture and tech working together. And the fourth action.
And 4, conduct regular, realistic tabletop exercises. But change the scenario. Stop focusing only on ransomware hitting endpoints or standard phishing attacks. Start running security drills that specifically simulate a SaaS supply chain compromise, just like this one.
Practice this exact scenario.
Practice this scenario. Practice the playbook for mass token revocation. Practice the cross-departmental communication needed. Practice assessing material impact quickly under potential SEC guidelines. Test your actual ability to respond effectively when the breach comes not through malware, but through a perfectly valid, trusted credential.
Excellent practical advice.
Yeah, look, the Salesloft breach, it really provided a clear, undeniable roadmap for both attackers and defenders, unfortunately. It showed us exactly where the greatest concentration of high-value, often unmonitored credentials currently reside. It's in those seemingly benign, trusted connections between our core cloud services. And given that the entire industry is relying on more and more of these deeply integrated SaaS solutions than ever before, the crucial question, I think, facing every single organization listening right now isn't whether similar attacks will occur again. They absolutely will. The real question is whether their current budget constraints, their existing security visibility, and their perhaps over-reliance on third-party trust will actually allow them to detect a valid compromised token before it exfiltrates their crown jewels.
That is a sobering but absolutely essential challenge for all of us to consider. Thank you for walking us through that incredible detail.
My pleasure. It's critical stuff.
It certainly is. Thanks for tuning in to InfoSec Bytes. Keep exploring our 100-plus episodes on information security, AI, cloud, quantum, and cybersecurity incident root cause analysis. Please like, subscribe. We are on various platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Amazon Music, and share to stay connected and keep your cyber defenses strong. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.